Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum everyone. You may have noticed that I post refutations of false Rumi translations on the Rumi was Muslim page as well as the Persian Poetics Instagram story and Twitter page. I've come across a translation that I thought deserves more than a simple post, but an entire video, and I think there'll be multiple benefits to it. One, you'll get to see the behind the scenes of how these refutations go. I know I've posted instructions before, but maybe seeing a video would kind of illuminate the process further. And second, you'll also see a few, let's say, dots on the board connected with regards to how these fake Rumi quotes came to be. And third, you'll see how the Orientalist mindset has actually infected the Muslim mind and that has kind of perpetuated this problem. So we'll start, inshallah, with the post that was sent to me by one of the Patreon supporters. By the way, if you would like to send Rumi posts for verifications, unfortunately now we get too many requests, but we're definitely able to take the time to look at the ones that are sent in the Patreon chat. I'm always there. So if you would like to send your own posts or questions or something like that, please do consider joining with the bio link. But without further ado, I was sent this post, and it seemed to be coming from a reputable page. I mean, it seems well formatted. There's photos and quotes with sources. And in this Rumi quote, there's a picture of Rumi, and it even has a source. We'll get to that later. But I read the quote, and I was kind of shocked, to be frank. It says, "We have extracted the essence, esoteric meaning of the Qur'an, and we have thrown the bones, exoteric parables, to the dogs." And it's quoted to Rumi, and look, it even has a source. So my first step was to see the source, which I did. I went to this article. It's very long, but I was able to find via search the quote that we're looking for. So here, the wording, you'll notice it's a bit different than here, but khair, maybe it's been reworded, that's fine. I wasn't able to find a source here. You can see there's no book or a page or anything quoted. Here it claims that it's from the Divan. You can see it's from Jalaluddin Rumi's Divan. I was able to, however, find the Persian text here, which is pretty rare. So it says, "Mazan Qur'an barguzidim maghzra, ustukhon pish sagan andachtim." So if you know Persian, you'll notice that there's a rhyme error here, or not a rhyme, meter, I should say specifically. There's a metrical error in the way it's read. So this, right off the bat, confirmed my intuition that it's not by Rumi, but khair, I figured I would continue. It's interesting. Usually when there's a fake quote, it's just in English. Someone made it up or something like that. But here there's a parallel Persian. So I researched further. There was no source given, however, with the original Persian text. I was able to just type it up myself. And I searched it up in Ganjur. As you can see, I just typed in the first line and I hit search. And I put Maulana. For those that can't read, this is the line. Says Rumi in Persian, and I hit search. And nothing came up. If you're not familiar with Ganjur, which I would guess many of you are not, basically it's a website that has a big bulk, I won't say all, not even close to all, but a big bulk of the Persian poetic tradition recorded in there. And it started as a small website, but subhanAllah, every day they're adding new poets. We can just check Rumi so you can get an idea of how it works. So this is Rumi in Persian with this picture. We can click the Masnavi. We can click the first Daftar, which is the first book. Then we can click the beginning. So this is the first lines of the Masnavi, Bishnu chon hikayat mikona. Just to show you how the search function works, if this was actually by Rumi, you could very simply just copy the quote, go back to the original page, and hit search, and the results would inshallah yield the place the poem is from. So of course we know this is from the Masnavi, but if we just found this bait, like I found that earlier bait, we could put it in, and behold, we would see Bishnu chon hikayat mikona. So we did the same thing with this and it didn't come up. So this basically confirmed my sentiment that it was not by Rumi. However, Ganjur, of course, is not perfect. So I decided to look even further. So we can close these two. And I Googled the poem. Now you can see the first result takes us back, I should say, to Ganjur. But it wasn't from the text, it's from a comment. Someone saying, "Why did you erase this bait or this couplet from your site?" So that is a dead end. Then I went to the next page. That was yet another dead end. Here it's quoted again with no source. And then I went to the next one, quoted with no source, of course. And then I kept going until I came across an edition with, instead of Sagan, I found one that said Kharan, which means donkeys. Many of these have quoted it in different articles or whatever. And I saw one that said Digaran. So Digaran means others. That's not quite as blasphemous, but it still struck me as not being by Rumi. So at this point, I felt slightly stuck. So then I went back to the post and I thought, okay, maybe I'm missing something. I looked at the caption and then I found a comment. Thankfully, someone had asked them for their source. And here we are. This is the source. It says, "See John Moyne's Rumi in the Sufi tradition." So at this point, I was kind of more curious. I had heard the name John Moyne before, but I never looked into him. So I decided to just Google him. So here, this was even more confusing. I see a picture of an Iranian, Pakistani, Iraqi, Turkish-looking gentleman, generally Eastern-looking guy, and I see a very Anglo name, John Moyne. And his birth and death place also kind of encourages that, or encourages me to think that. It says born Dublin, Ireland, and passed away in the United States. So I'm kind of confused. At this point, I'm thinking, okay, this gentleman is probably not actually John Moyne. He's probably someone else, and this is probably him. Google makes these types of errors all the time. You might remember there was a period of time if you Googled Rumi, a picture of Leonardo DiCaprio would show up. So perhaps this is just one of those things. I thought to myself, khair, I'll move on. So I clicked a couple of these links, and I found that one of his memoriam, writings or his obituary said Iranian by birth. That was pretty confusing to me. I thought, okay, maybe this gentleman is a Westerner who was born in Iran, but that doesn't make quite much sense because it said he was born in Dublin. So this leads me to believe that he was actually born in Dublin, but of Iranian origin, which would be very interesting, by the way, because there were very few Iranians who were moving abroad at the time. I mean, this is just a side note about Iranian migration. But khair, I moved on, and I found that here in a different obituary, he's described as a native speaker of Persian and Coleman Barks's primary collaborator in Barks's translations of Rumi. So I thought, okay, born to Iranians, and he's a native speaker of Persian, so he must be an Iranian. So then I thought, why is his name John Moyne? He must have changed his name then. It's impossible. I mean, if his first name was Anglo, then at least his last name would be Iranian. So I thought, okay, maybe his mother is Iranian and his father is maybe an Irish gentleman or something to that effect, and that's how he got a completely Anglo name. But in any event, I found out that he was Coleman Barks' primary collaborator, and at that point I was basically 110% sure that this quote is false. But I kept researching because I was curious to find out what the story behind it is, because it had an accompanying Persian text. So I went ahead and Amazon searched his name, and I found that he did have many books written with Coleman Barks, not just the infamous Essential Rumi that we all know is responsible for basically this whole Rumi fiasco, but also a few others. It's not so important. So then I Googled the book that the quote is from. Again, it's mentioned here, Rumi and the Sufi tradition. So I just inputted this, and I found that it was published in the 90s, and that unfortunately it's not available online, so I wasn't able to look into it. So we're kind of running into some dead ends. And I found that it was published by Mazda Publishers, and unfortunately, with all due respect to their efforts, I find that some of their poetry translations are not accurate, to say the least. So I thought it was at a dead end at this point. I thought, okay, I'll have to order the book and wait and look into it, and maybe there'll be nothing there. But luckily, I found that someone who had written a Persian language article, as you can see it's in Persian, about misquotations of Rumi, had actually directly quoted him. So you can see it says, "We have picked the essence of the Qur'an, throwing away the skin to the dogs." So if you'll notice, here it's different, and the post is different, and in his original it's different. So regardless, I Googled the actual text of this, and I found a refutation of this by the Mevlevi order scholar Ibrahim Gamard. Ibrahim Gamard, unfortunately, is probably the least known Rumi scholar, but his work is incredibly valuable. His website that I'm on right now, daralmasnavi.org, is an invaluable resource. He's also written his own books. He's translated all 2,000 quatrains of Rumi. I mean, subhanAllah, his efforts, you can't understate them. So he's actually quoted and refuted this. He says, "We have kept the marrow of the Qur'an. We have left the skin for the donkeys/dogs. ما ز قرآن مغز را برداشتیم. پوست را بهر خران و سگان/سگان بگذاشتیم." So it's kind of difficult for me to read his transliteration. But basically, the translation is accurate to the Persian. So he's saying this was translated by John Moyne, etc., and it quotes the same book. So this is what Ustad Gamard had to say. "This verse is obviously too radical to be authentic. Hundreds of verses, as well as other improvements, have been added to the Masnavi over the centuries. This verse was added to the story of Moses alayhi salam and the shepherd preceding Book 2, line 1763, and may be found in some contemporary editions of the Masnavi in Iran." This is a very common story, unfortunately. So you can see Masnavis printed in Delhi, Bosnia, wherever, and you'll find that there's lines added in, whether intentionally or unintentionally, Allahu alam. But in any case, what's important for our information is to know that this was not written by Rumi, and this was something added in later on. And as I've covered in some other segments before, this is kind of common in the Persian poetic industry, or the Persian poetry tradition, I should say, not industry. However, I was still curious about this John Moyne figure, so I kept looking up in the website to see if there's more information. And here I found the secret behind his name. So his name is not John Moyne, it's actually Javed Moeen. So this can kind of tell us a lot. I understand that there's assimilation pressures and things like that, and I of course grew up in the West, so I understand. But it kind of says a lot about someone who chooses to publish in a Western name instead of an Iranian or Persian Muslim name, however you want to understand that. Basically talks about what civilization they find themselves aligned with. And in a different part of his website, he actually writes about and kind of refutes other segments of that book. Although this website's kind of difficult to read, I formatted it in a document. So this is by the same gentleman, Sheikh Ibrahim Gamard. It's his website, just formatted differently. It says, in his book, Rumi and the Sufi Tradition, Essays in the Mawlevi Order and Mysticism, John Moyne first states that Rumi was a devout Muslim. So he does acknowledge that Rumi was Muslim. And that's essentially the essence of this paragraph. So he's not denying that Rumi was Muslim, lest I attribute anything incorrectly to him. However, Moyne then expresses agreement with the earlier generations of Western Orientalists by saying, however, there are compelling arguments that the origins of the Theosophy and doctrine of Sufism go back to the pre-Islamic era. He also refers to the alien origins of Sufism in the last chapter of the book. Moyne constructs an imaginary debate. This is very important. Imaginary debate. So it's not from any sources, it's from his mind. Between Rumi and a group of Orthodox Islamic jurists, Moyne describes it as an imaginary account of what could have taken place in the encounter between our mystical poet and the members of a delegation who attempted to persuade the celebrated Sufi poet back to formal and ritual orthodoxy. He suggests misleadingly that this imaginary account is reconstructed from the available texts. And with a false appearance of objectivity, he adds, this genre of writings integrates what can be extracted from the actual writings of and about Rumi and a historical novel. Not quite sure what this element means. Often the free flow of fictions depicts more effectively the sentiments of such an encounter than the concatenation of a set of passages from limited documents. So he's basically saying if we were to try to pick and choose what we actually have, we wouldn't be able to reconstruct an idea of what was going on. So I'll give you a bit of a historicized fiction so that you can kind of get an idea of what was going on. But it's important to note that this dichotomy is created by the Orientalists. So pay attention. They say they have the Sufis who are calm and cool and the scholars who are harsh, ignoring that the overlap between those groups is bigger than the non-overlapping segments. That many of our great scholars were Sufis and many of our Sufis were great scholars. The example is Rumi and Shamsuddin Tabriz, rahimahullah. He was a Shafi'i scholar. Rumi was a Hanafi scholar. They were both from the, Rumi especially from the Kibar al-Ulama of their time and place. They also do this thing with Shia and Sunni. They create these harsh divisions. Or with modernists and traditionalists, reformer and conservative. They love to break us up into two groups always for some reason and put one against the other, Iranian, Arab, etc., trying to break us up in a way that's foreign to ourselves. In Moyne's fantasy about Rumi, which seems to express his own resentment towards the Ayatollahs in Iran than anything having to do with Rumi, by saying that the most learned and capable among the priests, but there are no priests in Islam, of course, were sent to go to Rumi and persuade him to come back to the fold, to the norms of the Islamic law and tradition. It was in the pursuit of this mission that a delegation of the most learned and respected but highly conservative jurists arrived at the monastery. A prolonged debate and discussion ensued that lasted for several days. Here are some excerpts. So in Moyne's fantasy, Rumi is saying there are many ways to reach God. I've chosen dance and music as my path. Of course, Jalaluddin Rumi is bari from all of these things. He didn't say any of them. And I don't think there's much point in reading all of these, but what's important is to note that Moyne also quotes the non-Rumi line. I've refuted this on a Twitter thread, and it's available in the Instagram page and highlight. It says, he quotes a line that is not by Rumi. I am not Christian nor Jew. I am neither Gebr nor Muslim. So as you can see, basically, this whole story is, there are a few lines of poetry. The one about casting off Auzubillah, the exoteric meanings of the Qur'an to the dogs, and one about Rumi saying, I'm neither Gebr nor Muslim. So these lines are in Persian, but they're not by Rumi. So John Moyne, the westernized Orientalist scholar of Rumi, supposedly scholar, who's collaborating with Coleman Barks, he reads these, erroneously. We'll have husn then and assume he has good intentions, erroneously thinking that they're by Rumi. I won't say that he knew they weren't and that he had bad intentions, thinking that they're by Rumi. So he plugs them into his work, and then his work is read by someone with little knowledge of Rumi, unfortunately, and quoted in an article, And then this article is quoted by an Instagram post. And then this Instagram post is shared so that the Muslims can see it. And then a certain segment are misguided, thinking, oh, well, I was a bit lost. Astaghfirullah, look what, this gustach, says about the Qur'an, we've thrown it to the dogs and the bones and all this stuff. And, they think that Rumi is not a Muslim. And on the other hand, the other side of it, the other side of the affair, the people say, oh my God, look, these Sufis like Rumi, they're talking about throwing the bones of the Qur'an to the dogs, and I'm neither Muslim, nor Gabr or whatever. So on either side, we really have misinterpretations of Rumi, misunderstandings, and essentially what ends up happening is we have a big mess of things that he didn't write attributed to him, written by one person, put in an article, put in an Instagram post, and of course the average reader who's just scrolling through is not going to have the time to read through, go through this whole research debacle that I just showed you guys. And of course, I think I've been recording for about 20 minutes. I was researching for hours. 20 minutes is me just giving you the play-by-play. But of course, when I was actually sifting through everything and reading through everything, it took hours. So of course, the average person is not going to read hours to just get an Instagram post. But khair, that's why I do this. So inshallah, I hope that video was beneficial, just to show you all that these Rumi quotes, many of them are not authentic, but it's just a matter of painstaking research to find exactly where they come from. If you care about this project, this type of research, if it's valuable to you, I would highly recommend you to consider donating. You can go to PersianPoetics.com. There's a donate section. However, if you'd like to donate on a recurring basis and be in personal contact with me and talk back and forth about Rumi in the chat or any other related topic, you can join the Patreon and donate on a recurring basis. I'll just leave it at that. Other than that, I hope you have a good day. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And until next time, Allah ma'akum, God be with you. Goodbye.